All right, splendid. Hi, my name's Mark. I'm a postdoc in game studies at York. I'm a game dev and a retired pro gamer, though it's the middle of these mostly that I will be speaking on here. And this talk kind of trails on quite well from the previous talk, in that although I won't speak on Dwarf Fortress, I will speak on roguelikes quite a lot, and on this type of idea that PieceCG can be used for automation. So, broadly speaking, this talk has 5 things: a sort of intro bit, which I'm doing now, and then I will talk a bit about the upsides and the downsides of both PieceCG content, which is and handmade content, and then some games which have tried to link these, and when they've done it well, and when they've done it maybe a little bit less well. Although I hope the people who made the less well games are not in the crowd. And then I will talk a bit about how and why one might want to sometimes hide which aspects of your game are handmade and which aspects are PieceCG and why, and then offer some kind of broad outcomes, in that this is a kind of intro talk, in that there aren't really a lot of games which do this yet, and it's quite a kind of open and new field. So this is a kind of open questions type of talk. Okay, so PieceCG has quite a long history in lots of games, and since I have 25 minutes and 40 slides, I will make it extremely brief on this slide. But broadly speaking, PieceCG in general has been used for creating space in general. So making planets, making maps, making dungeons, making cities, blah, blah, blah. And broadly speaking, this is what it's been used for, or kind of platforming levels. And the genre which probably best sums up PieceCG, and I know that there's at least one roguelike dev in the crowd here, is roguelikes. And these are classic roguelikes. If you've not seen these prior, these might look deeply weird, but all the graphics are ASCII. And if we look at the top left one, say, the @ symbol, and the top right is the player. The green kind of percentage symbol is a corpse or a bit of food, I think. The curved brackets are weapons, the square brackets are armor, the more than and less than symbols are staircases, and so on. And these games are quite well known for challenge, for complexity, and for replay value. And there's a kind of deeply tedious, kind of long running thing, which I think I should mention, but I don't want to dwell on, which is that a lot of people kind of feud over whether modern roguelikes, things like Isaac and FTL and so on, are roguelikes, or whether they're roguelike-likes, or they're roguelites with a T, or other terms. And this is deep, and I feel at least that this is kind of deeply dull, but so for the sake of this talk, I will call all games which are broadly like roguelikes, even if they aren't ASCII, to be simply roguelikes. Okay, so first off, what are the upsides and downsides of PieceCG and handmade content? And the left is a screenshot from my game, which I'll talk about a bit later, and the right is a screenshot from Braid, as I think that these two quite well sum up and quite well epitomize the upsides and downsides of these two types of content. So first off, PieceCG. A big one, and this kind of links to the past talk, is that a lot of people see PieceCG as a means to speed things up, in that we don't sit down and make a bunch of handmade levels, we make a system which will then make those things for us. And there's no kind of hard data on this, and I'm not really sure how accurate a statement this is, really, because if you make a system which has to make levels, not just must it make levels, but it must also make sure that they are fun, and that they are good to play, and that they make sense, and that they can be solved and beaten, and that they vary, and so on and so forth. So whilst it seems fairly easy to say, okay, I will have a system where it places a bunch of rooms and links them and then I'm done, in reality it's a lot more complex than that. And then next up, a lot of people and things like Minecraft is quite a good example here, is that a lot of people use PieceCG systems to create, or at least they hope to make, very emergent game play, in that there should be certain outcomes which the devs couldn't have seen, and certain kind of intriguing things which can take place in the world. And in roguelikes, in general, this is called simulationism, e.g. NetHack, which is this screenshot. And in roguelikes, this is the idea that there should be some kind of systems within the game which take place kind of below the surface, and which the player might never see or never kind of engage with unless they know that they are there. And this is the idea that the world is kind of somehow living and somehow ticking over, even if the player is not fully engaging with this. And the upside of this clearly is that it lets players find stuff out, and in some cases find out stuff that the devs maybe didn't know was even in there. But the risk is that if there was something that the devs couldn't see, and this is game breaking, then clearly that's not the best of outcomes. And thirdly, also, PieceCG in general has been used to handle kind of constraints on memory, in that it takes less memory to place a bunch of rooms and link them than to store that map itself. And that's largely true in the past, and I think in general less important these days, and that's a screenshot of some items from my game. And in general, I think this is less important these days, but with that said, some games like my own game UR and No Man's Sky, when the world is so huge and you just can't have it all there at once, then clearly one can use PieceCG to kind of scale it back a bit and to only spawn bits which need to be spawned based on what the player is doing. Plus also, I don't know if No Man's Sky does this, I think they probably do, but I do this, which is that if you create a certain part of the map and then wipe it, but you store the seed, then you can make that piece of map back later, and you only store a single number. And then in terms of the kind of player side upsides of PieceCG, a major one is replay value, of course, in that each time you play it's the same game, but the levels vary and bosses vary and foes and doors and monsters and so on vary. And this makes a lot of sense, but the issue here is that the player therefore does not learn a set level of, I go here, I turn left, I kill this, I turn right, I go down here, I go up here, I get this thing, and move on. But rather you learn a kind of meta set of, I know how to deal with a certain class of foes, or how to use a certain class of items and so on. And therefore the game feels fresh and new each time. But the flip side of this is that the player still has to learn. And this is a kind of tricky thing in a lot of PieceCG games, in that a lot are extremely hard. As this is a screenshot from FTL, which I'll talk about more later, and lots of players can't beat this game on easy. And in terms of the classic roguelikes, which I showed prior, there are players who played NetHack for 20 years and have yet to win that game, because they are so hard. And this is in large part because it's harder, at least I think so, to master a game's systems than to rote learn a set of levels. And the issue with this is that some players struggle with this. And I wrote a piece a while back which became which a lot of people disagree with quite strongly, I think, in terms of the kind of gap between strategic and tactical failure in roguelikes and PieceCG games in general, which is that if you play FTL and you die, chances are your death was fixed many checkpoints back because you bought the wrong weapon or you sold the wrong crew member or blah blah. But when you die, it feels like, oh, the ship just got that final lucky shot on me or something. And so a lot of players feel that it's all just pure luck and chance when they die in this game, whilst the world's most skilled players can beat it basically every time on hard mode, thereby proving pretty strongly, I think, that there is, in fact, no luck. And therefore, learning when you have to learn these types of meta-level skills is just far trickier than rote learning a sequence, and lots of players struggle with this. Also, a lot of PieceCG games are extremely well suited to games where exploring and learning about that world is a crucial part of the gameplay. So all of these count, and Civ is a kind of weird one, and I thought it was worth including in that it is important in Civ to explore the world and learn where you are and learn where your foes are and learn where land and ocean are and so on. And you still know that the map will be unknown, but you know that it will have land and ocean and ice and snow and so on. And this yields a kind of fairly intriguing player feeling, I think, which is that if you play, say, Halo from start to end, then by the end you know, okay, I've basically seen the whole game. I've played every level, I've seen every cutscene, I've done this and that, and you know I've basically seen the entire thing. And if you play a Souls game or, say, a Final Fantasy game, then yes, perhaps I missed a secret level or a secret boss or a secret blah blah blah, and that's fine, but you broadly know, okay, it's done. Whereas in PieceCG games, unless you go on the wiki, you don't really know if you've seen the entire game yet, even if you win, and you don't know how much you have seen or how much you haven't seen. And I think at least that's a really enjoyable feeling to feel, rather than feeling, okay, I've done it all, so I could just do it all again, and it'll be the same. So those are broadly speaking the kind of 6 major upsides of PieceCG content. But as for Handmade, and there are only 2 slides of the upsides on Handmade, which kind of speaks to my bias, I think, a little bit there, perhaps, but also that in general you see more games where there's Handmade content placed into PieceCG games than vice versa, and I think I'm trying to kind of reflect that at least a little bit here in talking a bit more about the PieceCG than the Handmade aspect, and also in general, just most people make Handmade games, so I assume people, broadly speaking, know what the upsides of making Handmade games are. So basically, one of the big upsides is clearly that you can hand make things, and you have the chance to have cutscenes and to have stories and to have pacing and all of these types of things. And these are well focused to a subset of games which in general roguelikes aren't. In the roguelikes and PieceCG games in general don't really have a lot of story, or if they do have story, it's story told through what the player does, or story told through kind of mini quests, or through looking at a piece of armor and it explains who made that piece of armor and this type of thing. So handmade games are more well suited to teaching players about the game world and teaching players how to solve each level. And therefore that means just walkthroughs are easy to write. And that might seem like a kind of really trite comment, but I think it's worth noting in that lots of players use walkthroughs, and a large volume of people who play games just want to try something once, twice, thrice, and then say, okay, sod it, I'll find out how I do this, and then they do this. And PieceCG games, in contrast, never have walkthroughs, because you can't really write a walkthrough for a PieceCG game. You can kind of say, okay, by the time you reach level 4, you should have this much health. By the time you reach floor 10, you should have killed this foe, and so on. But that's kind of quite vague and quite kind of abstract. And this is a screenshot of the NetHack wiki, which very usefully shows all the different foes that you can encounter in the game, all of which are shown as letters. Anyway, and then a second major upside of handmade games is that there's 2 kind of genres which PieceCG really struggles with. And one of these is puzzles. And right now there's no PieceCG puzzle game on Earth which makes puzzles even slightly as good as, say, Portal or Braid or that type of thing. And there's 4 kind of major reasons for this. And the first is that a lot of puzzles require a bunch of steps, and those steps must be done in sequence and can't be done out of sequence, meaning that your PieceCG system must both be able to make a good puzzle, which is one thing, tricky in its own right, but it must then be able to make sure that there's no way to kind of shortcut through that same puzzle. And then this just gets worse and worse as one goes on, in that the next point there is that do you want it to have one answer or many answers? And if it's one, then your PieceCG system must be able to exhaustively check everything that you could do in that puzzle to make sure that there's only one answer. Or if you want many, then it must be able to make sure that there are many answers to the same puzzle, and the more complex the puzzle, the trickier it is for there to be lots of answers. And then thirdly, you have to make sure that if there are lots of answers, then each answer should be roughly as challenging as the others, in that if you have a puzzle with a really simple answer and a really challenging one, broadly speaking, that's not really what you want in most cases, and so your PieceCG PieceCG system then has to somehow see which answers are easy and which ones are hard and make sure that those are balanced. And then lastly, I think if you go and play things like Braid and Portal, you'll see a lot of puzzles in those games have clearly thought about what the player will be thinking and seeing and feeling when they encounter certain bits of that puzzle. And so therefore creating a PieceCG system which can think what will the player be thinking when they see a certain item or a certain wall or a certain door, it's extremely hard. And then also PieceCG games really struggle with things like narratives and themes, and so handmade games are extremely strong on those too, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So the 4 games which I think show quite well how this has been tried so far and how it's worked or not worked in some cases are these 4, and the last one is my game. And these 4, I think, can be kind of split into 2 groups of how they thought about putting handmade content into PieceCG games, and I'll talk a bit about that at the end. So, FTL, for those who've not played this, you play as the crew in a spaceship, and you kind of travel from checkpoint to checkpoint, and sometimes you will find a kind of handmade quest at one of these checkpoints. And I think the longest quest is about 4 steps or 5 steps, and the shortest are 2 steps, I think. And if you manage to find every single checkpoint on this kind of quest line, then you get a prize for something, and if you don't, then you don't. And the issue is that sometimes some of the checkpoints won't spawn. Since, say, if you reach the first checkpoint and it says, okay, you need to go to a certain sector controlled by a certain race, and that sector hasn't spawned, then you just can't do the quest, and that's just done, and it's just finished. And even if those do spawn, in a lot of cases, the quests aren't marked in terms of which checkpoints you need to visit, and therefore there's a kind of gamble in terms of, well, there are, say, 20 checkpoints in here, and one of these has the quest ending. I don't know which, so I'll just go to as many as I can. And this got a lot of player feedback in that a lot of people seem to like these sort of little more kind of story-based slices to sort of locate themselves within the kind of broader play of the game. But the downside was that they are extremely highly based on chance, and that there's a high chance that you just simply can't do a certain quest on a certain playthrough. And this kind of highlights that making PieceCG quests is quite tricky, in that if you wanted to do this, there's 2 kind of models to try. And one is that you make sure that every single world your game can make can have that quest in it. So you write a handmade quest saying this quest means doing A, B, C, D, and then you kind of feed that back into a PieceCG system saying every single world must have A, B, C, D in it. Okay, maybe. Or the flip side is that you ensure that the only quests which spawn into a certain world are quests which can be solved in that world. And you think that would make sense, but in general, FTL doesn't do this, and therefore there's this kind of risk of sort of dead-end quests, in air quotes. And then on the third point, another answer would be that if the player spawns the quest by moving on to the first checkpoint, then you force the rest of the quest into being, even if that quest hadn't spawned when you made the whole world. But that's quite tricky, because then you're kind of dealing with macro scale stuff being changed by the micro scale stuff of what the player does, and that can turn into a massive nightmare. Game 2. This is a classic roguelike called DCSS, or just Crawl, and this game has a lot of PieceCG levels and also these things called vaults. So these are 6 screenshots, and I'm sure in each of these you can kind of tell which part of the map has been made by the AI and which part has been made by a human, in that the AI parts are just kind of rooms and corridors or kind of random splurges of land, and the handmade parts at the kind of middle of the top left one, at the bottom of the bottom left one, at the top of the middle top, top of the bottom top, top of the bottom one, bottom middle, God, words, the top left of the bottom right, and the top of the top right. Those are handmade, and they've been kind of meshed into the kind of broader PieceCG levels. And each of these vaults, as they're called, offers some kind of challenge or some kind of thematic content, really. And these are, in general, a kind of fairly explicit break from the kind of mainstream of both what you do in the game and what you fight in the game. And crucially on this third point, this break in going from I know that the AI has placed this to I know a human has placed this is really clear in that you can't, on the top screen, I'm sure to say, I don't think you could mistake the vault for the PieceCG part or vice versa. And so when you go in, it's very clear, okay, I need to kind of slightly change my mindset here a bit. And these vaults in general offer the player a choice between, I know that there's a vault here, therefore I know whoever made this will have placed something fairly tricky inside it or something fairly challenging. But since in general they are extremely visually clear, and B, in general they have doors, so you can choose to enter or not, then you have a lot of choice over what to do. And therefore, in this case, adding these kind of little handmade chunks both breaks up how the level looks and how the level plays. Plus, also, vaults work quite well for allowing the player to kind of track their progress almost, in that one level full of rooms and corridors basically looks like another level full of these things in essence, unless the player thinks, no wait, floor 16 had this vault, floor 18 had this vault, floor 20 had this vault. 5 minutes, good grief. Okay, Spelunky, briefly. This game has this kind of thread of secrets which runs through it, and the sequence in which you must do these to reach the outcome is the same, but where each part is placed in each game is new. And if you've not played it, or if you have and you don't know how to get to hell, then you might want to stick your fingers in your ears now. So to reach hell, which is the kind of secret end of the game, you have to get the Udjet Eye, and then find the black market, and then buy the Ankh, and then find the Moai, and then kill yourself, and then spawn there, get the headshot, kill Anubis, get the scepter, go to the Golden City, get the Book of the Dead, and then go to hell, so to speak. And this sequence is the same every single time you play, but where each part is will be new each time. And therefore this allows you to kind of fit a sort of vertical handmade quest throughout all these PieceCG levels, and much like in Crawl, I think it gives a kind of meaning to what you do in each playthrough when you find these special things. Lastly, my game, which I will talk about briefly, I'm trying to create a lot of kind of PieceCG concepts which in general haven't really been PieceCG'd, if that's a verb, before, in terms of things like cultures and social norms and clothing styles and forms of conversation and so forth. And these are quite new, and these actually are extremely challenging to build, I found. So what I've done instead is to intersperse the PieceCG outcomes with handmade ones, so that I hope the person playing in general can't tell. So these are 4 religious altars, which the game has PieceCG'd, and some of these are extremely closely handmade in that the game maybe only varies the shape or the color slightly, and some of these 4 are very PieceCG based. And hopefully it's kind of tricky to tell which is which, I hope. How long? 4 minutes? 3.5? Perfect, excellent. Okay. And I found also that certain kind of building layouts are much trickier to make a PieceCG for than to make handmade. So this is a mansion, and I found that making a PieceCG system which can place all the rooms it needs to place, and place a kind of central corridor, and make it look at least vaguely good, was just extremely hard. And so I thought, okay, well then I will make this look handmade instead, but make sure that all the PieceCG outcomes of the other buildings in the game look broadly the same, so that the player in general can't tell. And then by contrast, something like a cathedral is very PCG based in that these are large, and there's no kind of strict constraints on what must be inside these buildings, and so the PieceCG is kind of given free rein to build whatever types of wacky cathedrals it wants to. And there was a rather kind of concerningly glam rock one which came up a few days back. And the key point here, and this is something I found from a lot of player feedback, is that most people can't tell the difference. So I would like to do a very quick test. This is a mint, and this is a parliament, and one of these is basically handmade, and one is basically very, very PCG heavy. So briefly, if you think that the top building is handmade, please stick your hands up now. Okay, I'd say it's about a third. If you think the top is PCG, please stick your hands up now. I therefore assume that vice versa will play out. Okay, in fact, the top is the handmade, and the bottom is the PieceCG, and since more people said vice versa, that proves the point perfectly. I'm so glad that worked. So, the point here at least is that in general, PieceCG regions I found can pass for being handmade, and vice versa, and therefore you gain more kind of control over over what the game looks like, whilst still making sure that, broadly speaking, it varies a lot each time the player plays. So, to conclude, I would say that there are two kind of main methods of doing this, which I'm loosely speaking calling these. And the first is creating some kind of thread of handmade stuff which runs throughout the game as the person playing moves forward. So both Spelunky and FTL are good examples of that. Or a more kind of horizontal version where you mix the two up so that either the player can or can't tell which is which, but that at any one instance the player could find either. Therefore, and this is a kind of open query, do we want to hide what is PCG and what is handmade? In that my game does, but something like Crawl does not. And in some cases it's kind of blindingly clear, like in Crawl. In some it helps pace the game, like in, say, FTL. But I think there's also a kind of risk that if the player knows that they're leaving a PCG segment, then that kind of makes the player think a little bit in a slightly different manner, I think, knowing that someone has sat down and handmade a certain region versus knowing that the PieceCG has kind of spewed out something, and whether that's good or bad or whether that varies between games, I'm not sure yet, and I think that's a kind of open field going forward. So to date, we've had a few games which have tried this. In general, it's PieceCG games which have little handmade bits rather than handmade games which have little PCG bits, as that seems to be a far kind of weaker version of this. But there's lots, mainly in terms of puzzles and in terms of stories, which can still be done and still be tried. So, thanks for listening, and any questions?